Welcome to another lesson on Patton Cloud support for call reporting. Patton devices are now able to send call detail records to the cloud. The cloud evaluates the calls and their quality in real time and shows call information in the cloud user interface. In this lesson, we will learn about the available settings for this call reporting feature. The first time that you click on the Calls menu item, you will be redirected to the Call Settings page, where you can enable the call reporting feature for the very first time. After the first time, you can always navigate back to the Call Settings page by clicking on the User menu gear icon here on the top right and selecting Settings. On the Settings page, switch to the Call tab. In order for devices to be able to send call detail records, or CDRs, we have to enable this feature here in Patton Cloud. By default, call reporting is disabled. So that means that none of the devices in your organization will ever send call information to the cloud. If you want call reporting to be enabled, just click on this slider and it enables. The second slider here can be used to specify whether you want this setting to be the default for all devices, meaning that all your devices should send CDRs, or leave it turned off, so to speak, if you only want a select number of devices to send call detail records. It's worth mentioning that you need to have Trinity Software version 3.17.1 or later in order for a device to be able to send CDRs to the cloud. Now in this case, where by default all devices should send CDRs, this is configured on the device by the command call reporting auto, which is now the default starting with version 3.17.1. This means that the devices with this default configuration will send CDRs to the cloud. If you have some individual devices where you don't want them to send CDRs, go to the NOTAMs client mode in your config file and enter the command no call reporting. This will disable call reporting at the individual device level. This is the opt-out method where a device can opt out of call reporting. There is also an opt-in method where you click here to disable CDRs by default. And now for those devices where you want to switch it on, you go to the NOTAMs client mode and enter the command call reporting forced. This will enable call reporting for that individual device. But for most customers, this setting will be good so that by default all devices participate in call reporting. We have to press apply to confirm. And this note here reminds us that once we click apply, then all the devices will quickly disappear from the cloud and reconnect immediately afterwards. This is required to update all the device configurations and to make sure that they participate in the way you want them to. So this is the setup portion of call settings. As soon as you press apply for the first time, then you will have this call history menu item available to you. Our call reporting overview lesson shows you how to navigate the call history records and how to look at the call detail records. Now each call is analyzed by the cloud and assigned a quality label. The call is either good or fair or poor. The call quality tab here on the settings page is where you can configure how a call is classified based on these sliders. For example, you can specify whether or not the average MOS score should be a factor when assessing the call. You can enable or disable whether this value is a part of the assessment. And then you can specify whether a certain value falls into the green range for good, or in the yellow range for fair, or into the red range for poor. In this example, and by default, MOS scores down to the value of 3.5 are considered good. Now, if in your organization you have a standard that says only MOS scores down to 4 are considered good, then slide this slider here to the value 4.0. And now it means that from 4.0 to 2.5, the call is considered fair. So change this slider to change the rating given to the MOS score. So that is it for the average MOS score. You can also specify the range for the minimum MOS score. What you are specifying here is how you rate the value of the worst 10 seconds of the call. You can also disable this if you are fine with just using the average MOS score. Note, however, that the average MOS score is not always very useful. Consider this scenario. It could be that the average MOS score on a very long call is quite high all throughout the call, but then at the end of the call, the MOS score drops drastically. And this is actually the reason why the user hangs up the phone. The call quality becomes so bad that the call can't continue. So what you definitely want to use in this scenario is MOS score degradation. MOS score degradation is the difference between the maximum MOS score and the minimum MOS score during a call. And we think that if this degradation is more than 0.5, then you drop from good to fair. So for example, if it drops from 4.4 to 3.9 for a G.711 call, then from then on, the call should be considered fair. And if the degradation is more than 1, then it should be considered poor. By the way, while we're talking about customizing settings, if you have configured your own custom settings on this page, you can go back to the system default settings by clicking on this reset symbol here, and this will change the sliders back to their original system settings. Remember that the MOS score is actually a combination indicator. It is the combined value of the packet loss rate, the codec itself, the delay, the round-trip delay of the RTP streams, and the jitter of the RTP streams. And here, for the assessment of call quality, you can not only configure assessment based on the MOS score, but you can also configure the ranges for the individual components of the MOS score. For example, the packet loss rate. We consider a call good if the average packet loss rate is below 2%, and we consider it poor if the average packet loss rate is larger than 8%. Also, for the maximum packet loss rate, which is again the 10 seconds with the worst packet loss during the call, we consider it good if it's below 10% and poor if it's larger than 30%. Again, feel free to change any of these ranges if your organization uses different values. The same goes for the round-trip delay and jitter. Here again we have sliders for the average value and the worst 10 seconds of the call. Whenever you change any of these values, please make sure that you scroll down and click or tap on Apply to confirm your new settings, or press Cancel if you want the settings to reset back to their previous values. One important thing to note, the new assessment parameters are only valid for future calls. Changes to the assessment parameters aren't retroactive. All the calls that have already been assessed by the system will not change. So if a call was considered good based on old slider settings, it will still be good in the database, even though your new settings might have rendered it a fair call. In other words, we don't retroactively reanalyze all the calls. Okay, we have covered the settings for the call and call quality tabs. Now let's look at user permissions. Remember that you can have different users, and each user is assigned to one or more roles. And the roles are actually the place where you assign permissions to your users via the various roles you have created for your organization. Here, where we define roles, we have a set of permissions specifically for call reporting. You see them here under Calls. The first two are related to the configuration settings that we just saw for call and call quality configuration. You can specify whether a user can view the call configuration settings and whether he or she can modify the settings. The third permission allows the user to view the call list. In other words, whether the call history page here should actually be visible to the user. The next option controls whether or not the user is able to view details such as phone numbers in the call detail records. If this permission is not granted for a certain user, then he or she is not able to see the phone numbers for the calling and called parties. The call quality permission is about whether the user is able to see the quality assessment of the call. This includes the good, fair, poor quality assessment, as well as all the details about the MOS score, the round-trip time, the packet loss rate, and so forth. And finally, the call details permission is whether or not the user is allowed to go to the details page of a call. If this is not enabled, then the user is only able to view the call list, but they cannot go delving into the details of any particular call. Okay, this has been a quick overview of all the call reporting settings that you can set for your organization. Please watch our other call reporting lessons to learn more about this feature. They include an overview lesson, a lesson on call-based alerts, and an advanced lesson. This concludes this Patton Academy lesson on call reporting settings. Thanks for watching.